and welcome. The short version, nearly 5 months after what some people are calling the least successful coup in Asian history, the Myanmar military is slowly re-cementing its grip on the same power that it held for about 50 years before 2011. Meanwhile, pro-democracy movement insists that the military must be removed from politics once and for all. And in both words and deeds, that pro-democracy movement is slowly pointing toward armed revolt as the only solution. So, we as Quakers know that there are way too many guns in this story for it to end well. And we as Quakers often also feel led to speak out when we see war being touted as the answer. So today, I thought I would share a bit of detail about the current situation. My information is described to me by many colleagues and friends inside the country. Then I thought perhaps we would pause for a few minutes of mindful Quaker silence, out of which I hope would emerge some kind of dialogue about actions that we might take. Those actions could fall under several categories, most of them aimed at either reducing stresses among the least advantaged or increasing pressures on the most advantaged in Myanmar. Many of you will have had much more experience with such actions than I have. So I truly hope we can make this a conversation rather than a one-way talk. As Rana said, I figure we'll last about an hour. Anything longer than that, I probably won't last. It's getting close to my bedtime. So I hope that plan sounds okay. Speaking of experience and of bedtimes, maybe I should explain a bit more about my own background and my location. For the past 3 or 4 years in Yangon, which is Myanmar's biggest city, I've tried to steer the smallish Yangon worship group. That's a group that began in 2014. And it was due to the vision of Mari Oy, who is a birthright Quaker from the US, who, like me, was then working in Yangon. During the first 5 or 6 years of Yangon Worship Group, attendance at meetings for worship mostly came out in the single digits. Since moving to Zoom, those numbers have risen, and now the email distribution list stands at about 70 people. 70. Most of those attendees, they now log on from outside Myanmar, including myself. I came to the US about this time a year ago for what I thought would be just a short monsoon-only visit to my parents. And during that year, I've been able to consult from here with the Myanmar office of the American Friends Service Committee and for a handful of other NGOs inside the country. But because of the pandemic and because now the coup, I haven't physically been in Myanmar since June 2020, even though I phone there most days and I stay in touch with the situation through several channels. All told, I've lived in Southeast Asia for a total of 18 years. And during that time, I've had a chance to work on several interesting, important issues throughout the region. I consulted for a mixture of US government, UN agencies, humanitarian organizations, and so on. So that's about me. About Myanmar, I'm going to assume a few things for this audience, such as I assume you know where Myanmar is. I assume you know that on February 1st, the military refused to respect the will of the voters. You know that since then, there's been way too much killing and abducting and extorting and censoring inside that country. So I will mostly focus on what to me currently seems like a stalemate, power-wise, and on the imploding economy, and on the downward spiral since the coup of several important humanitarian areas. In other words, not much historical background today, unless you tell me that you want some. Why don't we do this? Show me a thumbs up if it's okay to stay fairly present tense today. Just looking and looking and looking and. Okay, I see a lot of thumbs up and no thumbs down. So I'm gonna carry on about the stalemate. At the moment, the military leaders show no interest in participating in any election that they can lose. Meanwhile, the people insist that they'll settle for nothing less than a more representative democracy than the one they had before the coup. So this current standoff seems pretty awful. But arguably, you could come up with worse scenarios, such as, how about this? The heating up of armed conflict between the Tatmadaw. Tatmadaw, by the way, is the Burmese word for the Myanmar military. And the Tatmadaw has been fighting small-scale civil wars continuously since independence in 1947. So what if the armed conflict between the Tatmadaw and ethnic armed organizations began to heat up? These are the kind of groups that now and then have fought and then signed peace agreements or declared ceasefires of various lengths, but have suddenly become more active since the coup. Or another scenario, what if more and more guerrilla type tactics against everybody from township administrators to soldiers to any old enemy that a person might have been holding a grudge against? This kind of personal score settling that happens when societies break down. What if we saw more of that kind of thing happening? Unfortunately, we are beginning to see both of those scenarios now that we're into the 5th month since the coup. Today, explosions are so commonplace around the country that my friends no longer even mention them when we speak on the phone, or sometimes you can hear them in the background. They averaged about 10 per day in May, and the number is going up. Why this heating up of so much more conflict and so much more violence? Well, one way to think about it is this. Maybe those generals in charge of this coup managed to provoke a sort of nationwide uprising against themselves, especially among the young and the internet connected. Lots of people inside and outside see this coup as a huge strategic mistake. Thus, you get that label of the least successful coup in Asian history. And many of the people that use that label, they say there's really no guarantee that the Tatmadaw will survive this power grab. Even though the generals now have everything to lose, especially the relative immunity that they've enjoyed since forever, they're not winning. The people just aren't rolling over. Their resolve in the face of enormous cruelty is just remarkable to me. And when we say cruelty, what are we talking about? Well, how about attacks on hospitals? How about attacks on weddings? How about going to offices full of COVID-19 positive patients who are recovering there rather than going to the hospital and rounding those people up? Human Rights Watch is collecting reports of torture, mock executions. And just to make it personal, I have to say the tension that I hear in the voices of my colleagues and friends on the phone when I call to Myanmar, it reminds me that these people are experiencing CTSD. I don't know if there is such a thing, but how about current traumatic stress disorder? No such thing as post in this case. I don't know how they manage. These new clashes that I mentioned, they're more common than what took place in February and some of March, during a time when lots more people were reading about this in the international press. You may remember reports of large, peaceful street protests, and that those protests were met with relative restraint from the military. Today, you only see flash mobs, and they disperse quite quickly. People are afraid of reprisals. The nightly banging on pots and pans that maybe you saw in some headlines or on Twitter, that's now silenced by soldiers who threaten to burn any street or any village that participates in that kind of thing. And these soldiers, by the way, are said to be all jacked up on methamphetamines, which are among the current best exports of Myanmar. And that trade is getting, if anything, only bigger as the power vacuum grows. So as I said earlier, I don't know how people continue to hold up amidst this stalemate. There's also the imploding economy. I mentioned that. GDP is in just free fall because normal activities and jobs are not being done. Often they're not being done because ordinary people refuse to work for any entity that is under the umbrella of the military regime. And that could include teachers or doctors or bankers or railroad workers, bureaucrats of all kinds. You also have citizens who stashed cash in banks, and they must now queue for long stretches to get their money out of ATMs. The banks themselves often are shut. Channels for bringing money into the country are increasingly closed. And amidst all this uncertainty, you have leading foreign companies retreating. So bottom line, much of the population, as much as half, is expected to meet a definition of poverty by the end of this year. There's a stunning graph I came across recently, and remind me to show it later if there's time. It shows GDP forecasts for a dozen countries in the region. Every one of those countries but one shows a gain by 2022. Care to guess which is the one? And of course, Myanmar's economic decline is predicted to be worse than any of the other countries' gains. So pair those financial troubles with a downward spiral in several other humanitarian areas, health, education, hunger, migration. What you get is what lots of outside writers are calling state failure. I don't know if that's the right description. I don't even understand really what it can mean for a state to fail, but whatever description you give it, the country seems certain to export its troubles to its neighbors in the form of refugees and migrants, in the form of virus spreaders, in the form of young people seeking education, and so on. So this future, I think, should concern everyone in the ASEAN region. Just quickly about some more of these humanitarian problems, health in specific. The military have shown that they just won't be bothered to protect it. In some cases, healthcare facilities are actually occupied by soldiers who are looking for protesters who are coming in for treatment because they've just been shot by soldiers. At least 130 odd doctors taking part in civil disobedience movements are reported to have been charged under this catch-all section of Myanmar's notoriously unjust legal system. This is a section that assesses a 3-year prison term for causing fear, quote unquote, or for spreading false news, or for agitating directly to commit some criminal offense against a government employee. So the regime is using this law against a wide swath of its opponents, including not just doctors, but journalists, politicians, activists, social media users, and so on. And it adds up to chaos in many realms, not just health. About hunger, I've been lucky enough to consult for World Food Program several times since 2013. And in general, over the years, their food security surveys suggested that Myanmar had a pretty good ability to feed itself. Relative to other countries where that branch of the UN works, usually in Myanmar, there's a papaya tree nearby, or there's a stream with fish in it, or there's a kitchen garden or something. And about 70% of the population works somehow in agriculture. one kind or another. So generally, the World Food Program feeds only people who have been forced to leave home due to conflict. But of course, there are lots more of those people recently, as well as lots less cooperation from the authorities about WFP's ability to gain access to those people. So what we're finding is that the most concerning situation are conditions for the urban poor. These are people who don't have that easy access to food. For them, it's rice and salt, maybe twice a day, maybe if they're lucky. Those numbers are going way up, and there's a lot of those people. Education, the school year generally begins in Myanmar on June 1st, but this year only a paltry number of students and teachers have been willing to show up, in part because explosions have sometimes gone off outside schools. So you have a situation where a new generation will grow up perhaps not only severely malnourished, but also severely uneducated. Migration, about 175,000 people, the last number I saw, that's a big number, have been displaced, and probably more than that have fled to neighboring countries as refugees. But we don't have good numbers on that because Thailand officially is saying we don't want these people in our country. So it's hard to know how many actually have crossed that border. And let's not forget, since February, we've lost 800 or more people who have been murdered. We've lost hundreds of people who have been disappeared. So we're talking about a fairly desperate situation that is not moving the right direction. What to do? Well, first, for our purposes, I suggest that we soon take a few minutes to settle into silence, to listen for leadings from the Spirit. I confess that thinking ahead a little bit, I cheated by creating a slide deck, and that contains a few starter ideas on what to do. But let's say after 5 minutes or so of silence, then I'll return us to possible actions that ASEAN region Quakers could take. From there, we could either open the floor to those who already have deep experience in this area, or we could look together at my slide deck as a way of generating further discussion, questions. I, by the way, I'm no expert on solutions, which, as you may know, have challenged people working in or on Myanmar for many decades. Before we move into silence, I would just say that in-country Myanmar activists need to see evidence that outside actors, and that could include us, remain interested. Many of the people inside, and perhaps rightly, feel that the UN, other large international agencies, and much of the world has given their plight much less attention than it deserves. So with that, let me suggest that we spend a few minutes mindfully listening for messages. And then I'll bring us back out in a certain time, and we can decide how to proceed. Friends, let's return from silence and continue in that spirit towards the most effective way to proceed. As I said before, moving that way, we might open the floor to those who already have deep experience in areas of this kind, and they might suggest ways that ASEAN region Quakers could be useful. We could look together at a few slides as a way of generating further discussion or questions. Just taking those two things, why don't you show me your left hand if you would prefer to open the floor to those who already have some experience, and show us your right hand if you think it would be best to start from something already generated. Ready? All those in favor of the left hand, those who have already had some experience. Looking, I see a few of those. All right. And show us your right hand if you think it would be best to start with some pre-thought out ideas. All right, well, I saw more left hands. So opening the floor to anybody who has experience in areas like this and could suggest ways that ASEAN region Quakers could be of use in the current Myanmar situation.
Oh, there we go. Sue. Sue's got something to say.
I really wish to hear from people involved in the situation about what they would wish. And I'm involved with Religions for Peace International and Asia. And we had, I'll put it in chat because it's quite long. And I don't need to speak about it, but it's there to read. And we got some direction from the head of the Islamic Council, El Hajj, but I actually don't know how well he is respected within Myanmar. And that would be a question I would like to ask others if they know about, because Religions for Peace Myanmar has been working on this issue, particularly the Japanese and the international level, but I don't know. I'd like a broader understanding and I'll put in chat what I did and what was said to me or said to us at the meeting.
John, we do have a couple of people here who currently live in Myanmar. I wonder if they would like to speak to us.
Yes.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I'm Brett, and I'm here in Yangon. I also have a history with AFSC as country rep in Cambodia and Laos during the 80s and 90s, and actually early 2000s. So one thing that occurs to me, I think it'd be really interesting to hear from the AFSC folks here in Yangon, what they're doing, and if there are ways that Quakers in the region can help provide support of any kind for the AFSC efforts here in Myanmar. Of course, AFSC, like many Quaker organizations, prefers to work on both sides of a conflict, and I would be interested to hear more about the perceptions of that principle. Also, it occurs to me, I know we have AFSC folks from Cambodia here. I've honestly have lost a bit of touch with what AFSC is doing in the region, but it seems that there might be opportunities to request audiences with, say, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Phnom Penh, and to convey Quaker AFSC concerns about the conflict emerging in Myanmar. So those are just a couple of ideas. One thing I would like to add to John's very, very comprehensive, and I think really well thought through, well presented discussion of the current situation. I think one of the emerging constraints to actually responding in ways that we would like to is the space for civil society is increasingly narrowing. I think John referred to that a bit. And also we have the emergence now of the COVID Delta variant. And given the near collapse of the health system in Myanmar, I think many of us are expecting the worst in terms of COVID spread. And that is going to be a point where I guess the coup and COVID become kind of conflated in the coming months. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brett. Those are excellent add-ons. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if others who are in Yangon would like to add on to what Brett said or to what I said, I think there'd be lots of interest.
Hello, hello all. This is Suryaga.
Hello.
Sorry, it's morning time, so let me not open my camera. I don't want to show my face without questions. Thank you, John. First of all, you are really great of analyzing and mentioning. And and I just this is also we are normally talking about with John. I would like to add something about like a till we have a problem of Burmanization. Maybe John can explain more. This is like the big challenges between the ethnicity and Burmanization. Burmanization mean maybe John can explain. So even the military and the current government NUG has still arguing regarding of this ideology, and also we have facing of many how to say discriminatory, especially for minority religious and minority people. But we slightly seen of some optimism. I mean, good side. So before people are very sensitive and very touchable regarding about the religious issue. So allow me to highlight one things. A few days ago, there's one masjid. It's called like Islamic praying place. We are bound at a long township. So after that, now we see that many Buddhists and Hindus and Christianity, they say that okay, if this masjid, if this religion, Muslim religious building will rebuild, we are ready to donate. We should donate such kind of um, uh, posting, such kind of like a good thought are seen on the social media very widely. This is what we are missing before the military gender before that people are just enjoying and happy in. But so it's a kind of some good good things are changing at the Myanmar civilian side. And the Myanmar civilian are slowly getting know that where is the conflict came from, who makes the conflict between the religions or such kind of things. So this is one good things what I'm going to share. And of course, other things other regarding of like a exploring and other things already mentioned in John, but people are a bit threatening and fearing of what will be happen tomorrow, what will be happen for the kid future, what will be how to survive slowly. People are worried of between the Tamado and the current PDF. And John, I forgot what is the loan word of PDF. You know that? Maybe. Yeah.
It- when people use the acronym PDF in Myanmar today, they're referring to People's Defense Forces, not to a kind of document that you send by email.
Yeah. Thank you, John. So yeah, generally it's really great to meet with you all. And also, of course, I heard that someone mentioned working with some Islamic Council and something. It's really I'm not I'm not criticizing, but it's really according. I'm actually let me introduce myself. So I'm working as a FSE and already now 3 or 4 years, and normally I'm working as a social cohesion or social harmony parts more than 7 or 8 years. So some, especially I would like to suggest that please go and reach the ground people, not reach the some organization which is registration, which is the registered and government notice such as Islamic Council and some organization, especially for the Muslim community, because of they are not really representative of the Muslim community, and also for all they are just looking for their seat. I mean, me and John has some analyzing and something even maybe if I don't want to say too much, but if someone who interesting about such kind of things, maybe you can reach to John. John have many information regarding of the who and not only the organization but also some like a some community leader, especially from the Muslim community side. So well, that's all from my side, and I want to take too long. Thanks.
Thanks, Soyazar. Are there others from inside or who have been inside and have perspectives on what might be useful steps for Asia region Quakers to take?
Okay. Sandra's just told us that the other friend from Myanmar's had to leave us, then she'll try and come back. So Sandra, do you want to say anything from AFSC's point of view?
Thank you, Ranis. Thank you for everyone for being here. Thank you, John, for the presentation. Soyasar from speaking from his experience. I just would like to echo what Soyasar has said, that it's really critical to try to get to speaking to as many of the very diverse representations in Myanmar, so the different voices. I think also John can provide further information on that. I know that Brett, you asked about, what is possible from the FRC in Cambodia. At the moment, it's quite challenging to meet with the ministry. I mean, one thing is the COVID, another thing is there is increase in restrictions for civil society, INGOs. There is a very fine line on how much it can be said. So we are looking at how to develop some strategies with other partners. So maybe the voice coming from peace building organizations inside of Cambodia, as well in the region. So I think the approach is to come with with a partnership, a stronger collaboration, and ensuring that it's not just FRC concerned about what is happening, but as a community of peace builders, peacemakers, that we are all concerned. So there will be more discussions. We're also working very closely with the Mennonite Central Committee, not just in Cambodia, but also in Thailand. And we have our regional representative, Tom, who recently returned from the UK to Thailand. He cannot go back to Myanmar for probably quite some time. And we will be working with a lot of hopefully partners and collaborators in Thailand to continue the work in Myanmar. And we want to ensure that we are supporting what our staff and the communities that they work with and the partners, how they want to proceed. So having this meeting here today may provide more ideas of how we could support the small, I think there are small steps that we could do, but also larger strategies that we could think about and work together. But I think the key word here that I want to say is collaboration and working together. And yeah, Quakers and together with the vision of peace builders. Thank you.
Sandra and Cesar, thanks very much for those summaries of what AFSC might do going forward. I'll just add that on top of the specialty kinds of work that Quakers are able to do inside, from outside, there are a great number of humanitarian needs at the moment. And people have asked me, where might I contribute financial support? Where might I write letters? Where might I support both activists and journalists who have had to go into hiding? Those were some of the kinds of things that I sketched out in the slide deck that I created. And what I'll do is make sure that Ranas has that and that she could pass it by email to the people who are known to her on this call. Those who don't get that from Ranas can write to me and I'll send it to you. There's also the issue of support for a greater ASEAN involvement in the Myanmar situation. You may have noticed that just about a week ago, the UN General Assembly made a resolution that it has only done 3 or 4 times following military coups anywhere else in the world since the Cold War. So the General Assembly's vote was a big deal and passed overwhelmingly with just a few abstentions from countries in the neighborhood who are reluctant to go out on a limb and criticize Myanmar. But one thing that people could do who are interested in writing or lobbying is to thank governments that did go out on a limb. And those would be in the ASEAN region, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Vietnam. For saying that they would urge halting of arms transfers to Myanmar at this time. A letter could be very useful in thanking them for that. These are the countries in the neighborhood that abstained from that vote: Brunei, Cambodia, China, Laos, Russia, and Thailand. And yet all of those countries will be affected by a worsening situation in Myanmar. You could also think about writing or lobbying your own government to recognize the national unity government, the so-called NUG, instead of the military. At some point coming up later this year, the UN will be forced to make a decision about which of the two competing governments in Myanmar it chooses to recognize. And so it'll be interesting to see how the UN decides, and letters early on could urge your country to choose the right government to be recognized. There's also this 5-point action plan that ASEAN came up with about a month or 6 weeks ago that is intended to increase pressure on the junta, but probably will not. And one way that the NUG has responded is to say, listen, as part of that 5-point action plan, ASEAN said that it would provide one special representative from its organization. NUG is now saying, why one? Why not 3? Why not 5? Let's increase the pressure from many special representatives. In specific, they're talking about a troika that could include Indonesia, Malaysia, and Cambodia, rather than a single special representative from ASEAN. And as Brett noted, COVID is going to be a big issue. So advocating with your government for health supplies, for vaccines, for general assistance to mobile health units that are operating along the country's borders, all of those things I think would be quite useful in terms of lobbying points. And I've listed a few others in this slide deck that I hope we can spread around.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Michael's. Yeah. Thanks, John. And we will. I'm really happy to send these slides to everyone.
Here's a couple more lobbying points that Michael's moved on to. These things they speak for themselves, I think. But if you're the lobbying type, these are points that could be made. There's one more slide, I think, Michael, that talks about specific companies that could be pressured, mostly oil and gas, that continue to provide revenues to the military regime and don't have to. They could continue to pay into a trust fund that would then be accessible once there is a more legitimate government in charge of Myanmar. Backing up to the beginning of this slide deck, you'll find when you read it, there are suggestions on places where you could send financial contributions, and those go a long way. It's remarkable how little it takes to meet basic needs for people's livelihoods. These 3 organizations that I've listed here, the top 2, excuse me, continue to have channels for getting money inside the country, which is a challenge for any international NGO, including AFSC. AFSC at the moment has money it would like to spend, but is finding it difficult to get that money to partners inside safely. But the 2 that I've listed at the top have managed to do this as of last week. And then I listed a PayPal account that's associated with my name there. If you felt like donating to the cause of the week, I'm often approached by people who, let's say, are providing rice in the poorest neighborhood of Yangon, or are responsible for moving someone to safety from inside and need a plane ticket or taxi fare to get somebody safely across the border. So any money donated to that PayPal account, I will use to meet those more immediate needs. And as I said, we'll send this slide deck around.
Yeah. John, I'm just conscious of the time, and it's been very late to you, and I suspect the quiet and somewhat somber response from all of us is a feeling of I guess despair and helplessness. What can we do? So it's really appreciated that you've given us some pointers of positive moves that we can make as individuals and with our Quaker meetings. I'm wondering if we might just, unless there's any last thing that anybody says, but just close with a few moments of silence. And
Ronis, I'd just like to note that there's quite a bit of commentary in the chat from people who obviously have constructive comments to make. So you might like to look at the chat to catch up with that.
yeah, okay, so we'll save that and perhaps circulate some of that to people who haven't been able to read it as we go along. And we might do this again sometime, John. I think everybody's very grateful for you giving your time and sharing your concern, and thanks everybody for coming to offer by showing up. I guess that's a sign of support, so we really appreciate it.
Well, you know, Ronis, it's really my pleasure. And I might just add before we move into a goodbye silence that I hope that some of you will consider merging with our worship group from time to time. In our Yangon meeting, we've enjoyed worshiping together with Singapore meeting, for example, not long ago, when we just all went to the same Zoom. Others from Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, Cambodia, Japan, they seem to have found us occasionally and stayed in touch. So please consider yourself welcome and join us any Sunday.
Okay, thank you. And I can pass on that link to anyone who would like to join those friends in worship. So thank you very much, John, from all of us. So let's just close with a few. Did you want to say something, Sandra? Let's close with a few moments of silence, and then we can just farewell each other as you need to leave. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you.
Bye, everyone.
All the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Stay
you.
well, stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Well, John, thank you very much.
Yes, night, night, everyone.
Yeah, have a good sleep.
Will do. Thanks again, Ronis, for all your efforts on this.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be in touch. Good night.
Okay.
Night. Yep. Well, there you go. Reality into it, doesn't it? Kind of interesting, that comment about the different groups and the different the powers being wielded by that powerful. Yeah. Yeah. Various others are downtrodden. Did you save the chat? I tried to. Yes, I have. Yeah, okay.